Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I know it's been a while since I last posted, but I've managed to find somewhere safe. So much has happened since I last managed to get online properly, and the game's changed again. I've just been trying my best to keep a low profile after my previous post drew quite a bit of unwanted attention. But now, I just need to get this out there. And thank you for all your kind words and suggestions. It's been good to know that there are people out there who sympathize with me. And God knows how I would have been able to cope with all of this alone. So the last time I was able to post, I was hiding out in that quiet cafe near the newly shrunk border. It was just after I realized exactly what I'd gotten myself into after the bird masked man had shot those people on that stage, and my wife had been threatened after I'd left the area of play. I stayed there for as long as I could, trying my best to sink into the furniture and sitting as far away from the window as possible. My mind was reeling. I was pretty sure I was going to die. And all I could think about was how my wife wouldn't know. She would think I was on a way on a business trip and just never came back again. I wanted more than anything to call her, to tell her what was going on, but I know in doing so that I would put her in danger. Sifting through the miasma of feelings swirling through me, I was nearly oblivious to the other patrons. I hardly noticed them as they slowly trickled away one by one, each taking their leave, until finally I was the only one left in the cafe. Something touched my shoulder and I screamed, the blood-curdling echo sounding around the empty building. Jumping to my feet, my heart beat a frantic rhythm as I spun around, staring wide-eyed into the wrinkled face of the owner. Obviously, startled by my outburst, he looked at me with concern in his eyes and a nervous pang in his voice and told me that it was time for him to close up. Although I knew I couldn't stay there forever, the same horror that I'd felt only a few hours ago as I watched that stream filled me as I imagined that a hunter lurking outside was waiting for me. I pleaded with the owner to let me stay just for a few minutes more, just so I could have some time to think before I had to face the outside world again. From the nervous look in his eyes and the way he was wringing his hands, I could tell that he wanted me gone, but he was too polite to say anything. I sighed heavily, and I resigned myself to the fact that I wouldn't be able to stay there, making my way to the door. As the night's cold air brushed against my cheeks and the cafe closed behind me, I knew I needed to get off the streets. I'd be a sitting duck out here. My head darted around, looking for any sign of movement as I made my way through the dimly lit streets, scrutinizing any patches of darkness, anything out of reach of the streetlights, for any sign of movement. I needed to go somewhere, anywhere, but I had no ideas. My mind was too scrambled from what I'd seen, and the adrenaline that had so far been keeping the pain from my injured ribs and leg away had pretty much ebbed off at this point, making each step an agony as I gradually stumbled forwards. I couldn't get a hotel, I had no money, and I'd spent that little pocket change that I had left in the cafe buying the occasional drink as a justification for staying there all evening. Sure, I had my card, and sure, I had money in my bank account, but that was a one-way ticket to getting captured. If the hunters had managed to get onto the dark web to join the game in the first place, it wasn't too much of a stretch to imagine that at least one of them was monitoring mine and the other hiders' accounts. If I used my card anywhere and they were watching, it would light up my location like a Christmas tree. No, I needed to be clever about this. Racking my brains, I continued walking along, all the while my eyes darted side to side and I was ready to run at the moment's notice. Eventually, after making my way along a few more streets, the first stirrings of an idea started to form in my mind, gradually coalescing into something more concrete as I mulled it over, and I finally had something. It was risky, and if I messed up, then I'd be back to square one, or worse, standing on that stage in front of the man in the bird mask. But it was the best that I could come up with on that short notice. I made my way further into the city, looking over my shoulder all the way. The streets were nearly abandoned now, although I did pass the occasional other pedestrian. I kept my frantic eyes fixed on them as I approached, my heartbeat steadily increasing as I scanned their features for anything that would give them away as a hunter. Inevitably, to my relief, they would just pass me by, occasionally looking back with a confused glance as I watched them walk away. Then there were the cars. With each rumbling engine that I heard, a spike of adrenaline coursed through me. The glaring headlights that bathed me each time a vehicle appeared on the road sent a jolt of panic burning through me. I expected to hear the screeching of brakes as the car slammed to a halt in front of me, and then a hunter charged out, ready to sentence me to my death for the amusement of several anonymous sociopaths on the dark web. One van, in particular, set my teeth on edge. It seemed to crawl along behind me as though its occupants were trying to suss me out, its headlights preventing me from seeing the driver. I tried to pick up the pace, but with each forceful step, my legs screamed at me to slow down. All the while, I was expecting to hear the slamming of doors and the frantic footsteps of someone running towards me, ready to throw me in the back and then cart me off to God knows where. Relief washed over me as a few seconds later the light passed me by and the driver of the vehicle not so much as giving me a second glance. I didn't know how much more of this I could take. I just needed to get there, then I could get off the streets. My idea wasn't exactly safe by any means, but at least I wouldn't be vulnerable like this. After what felt like hours of trudging through the gloomy streets, the houses slowly broke away, revealing the large open space of a nearly empty car park, and further on the glowing fluorescent lighting of this city's Walmart. The cafe had closed, but I knew the Walmart would still be open. It didn't close until 11 p.m., so I still had a couple of hours left. Now, the very thought of shoplifting made me feel sick to my stomach, and I'd never so much as gotten a speeding fine, let alone actively considered committing a crime. But my situation was dire, and I couldn't think of any other way to do this without using my card and alerting the hunters. The store was fairly quiet, but there was still enough people perusing the shelves that I could try to blend in and look inconspicuous. Making my way towards the store, it was quiet other than a few evening stragglers. Surprisingly, even with my haggard appearance and blood-stained trouser leg, I wasn't the strangest looking person there. I grabbed a cart from outside and made my way into the bright lights of the store. And walking through the automatic doors, my head was on a swivel as I made my way from shelf to shelf. I just needed a few supplies, that was all, like a sleeping bag, some different clothes, painkillers, and a few other necessities. And then I could just walk out the door as though I'd paid, and hopefully the security guards would be none the wiser. Still, my heart pounded in my chest as I made my way around the store, trying to move as inconspicuously as I could. I swear, I could feel the eyes of the other shoppers fixed on me as I walked from aisle to aisle. A chill worked its way through me as I wondered if any of these people were perhaps some of the viewers of the stream, watching us like mice trapped in a cage. It was all hosted on the dark web and anonymous after all, so they could be anyone. There was one particularly strange man in a greasy-looking worn maroon sweater who I was certain was involved somehow. It seemed as though he was tracking my progress around the store. I saw him around several of the aisles while I was filling my cart. Each time he would fix me with a strange expression, an almost knowing one. He wasn't a hunter, I was sure of that. He didn't look anything like any of the pictures that I'd been sent. But he still unnerved me nonetheless. I tried to pick up my pace and then get out of there. And as I nearly finished my trip around the store, gathering my supplies, I began making my way towards the automatic doors, keeping the security guard firmly in my view. He was busying himself with a magazine in his booth, paying no attention to me. And just as the doors were within range, about to slide open on their own, a jolt of terror coursed through me as I remembered my phone. I'd not charged it since all of this had started. If it died and my location was no longer visible to the organizers, then God knows what they would do to my family. Dragging the car to a halt, I quickly spun around and shrank back into the depths of the store. I need a charger and somewhere to charge it. As I turned into the electrical aisle, the man in the sweater was there again. He watched as I selected a charger and then threw it in the cart, fixing me with a slight grin and that knowing expression again that made me feel sick. Shaking it off, I turned and I started to make my way back towards the automatic doors. Approaching the doors again, the security guard was no longer in his booth, no longer distracted by his magazine, and he had gotten up and started to make his way around towards the tills. Cold sweat broke across my forehead as I watched him getting closer and closer to me. My heart beat a frantic drumbeat in my ears. He knew what I was going to do. I'd walked out of the door and he'd put his hand on my shoulder and then drag me back in. And this was it. I was as good as caught. If he stopped me, he would be guaranteed to call the police, and then I'd be stuck in a cell with no way to charge my phone and no reasonable explanation for what I was doing. The organizers would kill my family, and I would be a sitting duck for any opportunistic hunter. As the sounds of his shoes clacking against the polished concrete floor grew louder and louder, I closed my eyes, readying myself to charge through the door and to try to run across the car park as fast as I could. I doubted that I would get far with my injuries, but I was getting desperate. Without these supplies, I was back to square one. Worse even, as I'd wasted all this time. Turning to glance at the security guard again, he met my gaze, his steely blue eyes locking with mine for a few moments, and I froze, my legs suddenly feeling as though they were made of lead. He was closing the distance between us, and at such a pace that I had no hope of outrunning him. And as if in slow motion, he opened his mouth to speak and I cringed, expecting the shout of, "Hey you, stop right there!" I waited, locked in place, resigned to what was about to happen. But much to my relief, the only words that left his mouth were, "Good evening, sir," as he passed me by and then continued onwards towards the tills. "Good evening," I murmured with great effort, pulling my face into what I hoped was a normal-looking, trustworthy smile. My legs were shaking, but had been freed from that terrified paralysis that had gripped me a moment ago. Not wasting any more time, I forced the cart through the exit, and the cool night air once again greeted me. I was outside, in the clear. I've done it! And although it made me feel sick to my stomach that I just shoplifted, that I was now a criminal, part one of the plan was off to a flying success. Once all of this was over, I would go back and pay for everything that I'd taken. But right now, I needed to focus on the plan. Now all I needed to do was enact the second part. Moving swiftly before anyone inside the store realized I'd shoplifted, I pushed the cart past the glass front towards the edge of the building and out of sight of the store workers. Daring to take one glance back inside to make sure that I wasn't being watched, my scalp tightened as the eyes of the man in the worn maroon sweater met mine. He was watching me through the glass as I walked along the front of the supermarket. That same knowing grin was spread across his face, and I swear that I saw him mouth something that looked like good luck, before the store's interior was blocked by the brick of the outer wall. Shaken, I tried to get the image of his face out of my mind. He had to be one of those sickos tuning in to watch us each night. Or even worse, what if he was one of the organizers? Either way, seeing him standing there was a harsh reminder of exactly how unsafe I was and how they knew everything that was going on. Moving around to the back of the store, I rested my cart against the back wall and I waited under the cover of darkness, peering around the corner. 2 large dumpsters were pressed flush to the wall near a solid metal door, just like I'd hoped. And turning back to my cart, I shoved the charger, clothes, painkillers, and my other ill-gotten goods into my large sleeping bag, taking a couple of painkillers as I stood there and waited. Sitting in the dark on the cold sidewalk by the side of the store, I felt so vulnerable. The sounds of cars entering and exiting the car park, although few and far between, were enough to set my teeth on edge. After what felt like an eternity had passed, another sound met my ears, and I got to my feet, readying myself for what was about to come next. Just before the store closed at 11, the sound of the metal door opening echoed around the empty parking lot. Sidling up to the corner of the store, I peered around to see a tall, thin man in his late teens wheeling out a large trolley filled to bursting with food. The wheels squeaked as the less than enthusiastic worker pushed the trolley over to the dumpster, flinging open the lid and carelessly throwing the contents of the trolley inside. I stood there, dimly aware of the throbbing ache in my leg as the trolley slowly emptied of its contents and was finally wheeled back inside through the metal door. Waiting for a few more minutes in case there were any more waste to bring out, when the young man failed to materialize again, I gingerly made my way around the corner and over to the dumpster. Throwing open the lid, I had to cover my nose to save it from the vicious onslaught of stench that came from within. Now, I know what you're thinking. And yes, some of it was disgusting, but I only took the parts that were packaged. If it was loose or had touched something that looked rancid, I left it well enough alone. The last thing I wanted was to have survived gunshot wounds and car crashes just to be hospitalized by a bad tuna sandwich. I gathered up enough to make a semi-decent meal, not wanting to linger too long in case anyone discovered me. And all in all, I ended up with a few cakes that had exceeded their sell-by date, a roast chicken, and a couple of cans of Diet Coke. It was hardly the most nutritious meal, but you'd be surprised at the amount of still edible food that supermarkets throw out daily. Once I'd stashed my meal securely in the sleeping bag with the rest of my stolen goods, I looked around trying to assess what to do next. I could try and hide out in the park maybe. I had a sleeping bag and some other essentials. Or I could try and stay there as long as I could and only venture out to charge my phone or for food like some kind of hermit. Shaking my head, I knew that wouldn't work. The only park that sat within that circle of play was a small, well-kept public park that saw a lot of use. There's no way that I'd be able to hide there without people seeing me. If anything, the appearance of someone sleeping through in the park would draw more attention than anything. I needed something else. Quickly scanning around again in case I was being watched, my eyes locked on something against the wall by the dumpster, and a new idea began forming in my head. It was a thick drain pipe, at least 6 inches across. It was towering at least 18 feet off the ground, and it led all of the way down from the supermarket roof, securely fastened to the wall in several places, before vanishing in the concrete of the floor at the bottom. If I could somehow climb that pipe, I could get onto the roof, and I could easily hide out there. No one would think to look for me in such an odd place, and I would have a good vantage point to ensure that no hunter snuck up on me. I could hide up there for the rest of the game in relative safety. Plus, if I needed anything, like food, water, or anything else, then I could just shimmy down the drain pipe again and get it out of the dumpster. It was perfect. My heart beat rapidly with excitement at the prospect that I may have just found a way to survive this. Pushing my cart over to the drain pipe, I leaned against the cold metal, testing my weight against it. It didn't budge, the thick iron bolts holding it firmly against the brick wall. This might just work. I knew it would be a hard climb with my injured ribs and leg, but if I was careful and used the bracket supporting it as footholds, then I was sure that I could make it. Besides, what other options did I have? Taking several more items from the dumpster to keep me going for a few days, and then stuffing them into my sleeping bag, I tied it at the end in a loose knot. Hurling it up into the air towards the roof, my ribs twinged with the movement. It soared through the night and landed with a dull thud on the PVC above me. There was no going back now. If I couldn't make it up there, then this entire evening would have been a waste. Moving into position, I clambered onto the top of the dumpster. A dull fire burned its way across my chest as I pulled myself along the hard metal lid, and my cracked ribs took my weight, causing my eyes to water. It died down to a throb as I stood, but it remained there as a menacing reminder that I was not in a good way. I needed to be careful. I looked the drain pipe up and down, psyching myself up for the climb ahead. And although there was only 12 feet between the dumpster and the roof, and the holds around the pipe looked pretty sturdy, I couldn't shake the whining voice in the back of my head telling me that this was a terrible idea. If I fell from that height, I wouldn't kill myself, but I would sure as hell break something. And then I would be stuck in the hospital. If the hunter who'd crashed his car into me had been abducted from the hospital before being shot on that stage, then what chance would I have with a leg or an arm in a cast? I closed my eyes and I took a deep breath, trying my best to ignore the throbbing that's radiating out of my chest and my leg. And then my eyes open. I reached forward and I grabbed the nearest iron fastenings, gripping it tightly as I brought my feet to rest on another below. My ribs screamed as I stretched out to reach the next fastening, and I snapped my arm back with a yelp. Taking a few slow breaths, I tried again, reaching out for the hold, trying my best to fight through the searing pain now radiating out of my core. Hooking my hand onto it, I quickly brought my other up to meet it. The pain of even that small movement was excruciating, but I did it, breathing out a sigh of relief as I brought my foot up the next fastening. The pain in my chest subsided slightly as my body relaxed a little, no longer stretched taut. I hung there, shivering slightly from the pain. I wanted more than anything to stay there or to go back down to the dumpster lid. The idea of reaching my way up again sent a pang of anxiety through me, but I knew that I needed to do it, that it was the only way that I would be able to get onto the roof, and I had no other ideas, and I'd just thrown everything that I'd stolen from the store up there. So if I need to carry on, there was no other choice. There were only 2 more fastenings between me and the roof. I only had to raise my hand up 3 more times in total, and then I'd be on the roof, and all of this would be over, and I'd be safe up there, and I could rest for a while without the fear of being caught. Using that thought to power through my anxiety, I shot my hand up again. The familiar searing pain emanated across my chest again, tightening and making me cough slightly. But I fought through it again as best as I could, fumbling with my fingers until they hooked onto the fastening. Immediately swinging my other arm up to meet it, I dragged myself up and hung there for a few seconds, allowing myself a few breaths before reaching out again. The agony in my chest intensified with each inch that my arm stretched. It felt as though I was ripping myself in half, tearing at my lungs and snapping my bones with each movement. I missed the final fastening and my arm swinging wide, and I had to fight to maintain my balance. I was about 12 feet off the ground now, hanging there on that pipe. If I'd fallen from there, it would be as though I'd fallen out of a 2nd-story window. Not fatal, but not a nice fall either. Combine that with my existing injuries, and I would be in a sorry shape. Scrambling to grip the pipe again with my free hand, I hung there as the wind whipped through my hair. I couldn't afford to stop here for much longer. I needed to get up. My forearms were burning along with my chest, and I didn't know how much longer they would be able to hold out for. I needed to get onto the roof soon, or I would lose my grip and fall anyway. Taking a sharp breath, I grit my teeth as I threw my arm up again. The fire in my chest reached an unbearable intensity as my fingers latched around the fastening. Dark clouds lingered at the edges of my vision as I pulled myself up, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. They threatened to consume my vision, sapping my strength the longer I lingered. Everything felt heavy as my body was trying its best not to pass out due to the pain. I was so close now, so close. I just needed to pull myself onto the roof, then all of this would be over. Then I could rest. With a shaking hand, I reached up again. Thankfully, the gap between the final fastening and the roof was almost half the distance between the fastenings themselves, and I was able to reach it with minimal stretching, although the fire in my ribs still burned brightly. I thanked whichever gods would listen as I dragged myself onto the cool PVC of the roof, lying there in complete disbelief as I thought about all of the ways that could have gone wrong. The cool night air whipped at my skin as I lay on the exposed roof, a sharp contrast to the white-hot pain in my chest. Slowly getting to my feet, I glanced around and located my sleeping bag a few feet away from where I clambered onto the roof. Scooping it up, I took in my surroundings. The roof was mostly flat and divided into 3 sections. The low section I was on, a slightly raised middle section, and another lower section matching this one. There were also a couple of raised areas where the air conditioning unit sat, breaking through the monotony of the landscape. A small stair bulkhead with a large metal door that obviously led down into the store itself sat in the middle section, and behind the bulkhead, separated by a narrow gap, was a mound almost as tall as it, covered loosely in a tarpaulin. Making my way over to it, I could just about make a dark fabric underneath. Flapping loosely in the wind, It was white and red with a few black patches. And getting closer, I recognized the colors. Santa! This must have been where the store kept its inflatable winter decorations when they weren't using them. My heart soared as I imagined the Christmas lights, and the realization dawned on me that there must have been something up there to power them. Some kind of outlet. Glancing around, I could just about make out 2 waterproof outlets on the back wall of the bulkhead, just between it and the mound of deflated decorations. This was perfect. If I could squeeze myself between that gap, I could create a well-hidden shelter that would be out of the way of the wind. Plus, I could charge my phone. Sliding my way between the mound and the bulkhead, I pulled out my stolen phone charger, plugging it into the outlet before darting underneath the loose tarpaulin of the mound and out of sight. The plastic sheeting provided some shelter from the wind as I huddled up closer to the deflated mound. I unfurled my sleeping bag in the dim light, tinged blue as it seeped through the tarpaulin, and I laid it down next to me as I took out the food. Wolfing down one of the cakes, and then some of the chicken, and one of the cans of Diet Coke, this was the safest that I'd felt since I'd left the cafe, and I finally allowed myself to relax a little. All I needed to do was wait up here for a while. Just wait this whole thing out, right? I sat there, hunger now thoroughly sated, and allowed myself to rest. And within a few minutes, the fatigue of the day caught up with me. I was in pain, exhausted, and wanted nothing more than to sink into oblivion. My eyelids drooped heavily as I positioned my sleeping bag closer to the mound, leaning it against the soft fabric of the inflatables to use as a makeshift pillow. And seconds after slipping inside, I was fast asleep. Much to my surprise, I slept like the dead, the rippling wind and the sounds of distant cars dimming into nothing but white noise. Even in the early hours of the morning when the store opened, the sounds of the car park and the faint music from within the building itself were nothing more than mere humming in the distance. At some point in the early morning, as it was just beginning to get light, I was ripped from my slumber by a high-pitched whining noise. My eyes snapped open as the noise stopped, being slowly replaced by the clicking of footsteps as someone made their way onto the roof through the open metal door of the bulkhead. I froze, unable to understand what was happening in my half-asleep state. There was someone on the roof. What if it was a hunter? A chilling thought tore through me. Had I been snoring? I'd never snored before. At least my wife had never said anything. But what if I'd somehow started last night? What if a hunter had heard me snoring and had come up here to investigate on the off chance that someone like me was hiding? It's not exactly normal to hear snoring coming from a store roof. The footsteps sounded again, making their way across the roof, and I held my breath, sitting as still as I could, trying to become one with the mound next to me. If it was a hunter, then there's no way that I could outrun them. But maybe they wouldn't find me if I was as quiet as humanly possible. Silently thanking my lucky stars that I was still obscured by the tarpaulin, all I could do was wait. My heart was beating a frantic tattoo into my ears as the footsteps drew closer. I closed my eyes, holding back the stirrings of tears, waiting for the tarpaulin that covered me to be viciously torn away and for a hand to reach out and grab me. Then, another bolt of fear coursed through me as I remembered that my phone charger was still connected to the outlet in the wall. The cable was trailing down and led under the tarpaulin where my phone sat. If anyone turned the corner and saw that outlet, then I was done for. What felt like hours passed as I listened to those footsteps, waiting for the inevitable. Then a voice cut through the background noise, and a flutter of hope filled me. Ah, bloody wind. It's freezing up here. I don't understand why Jake insists that I have to come up here for a smoke. Why can't I just do it out front? The footsteps seemed to turn back towards the door, getting slightly fainter before they ceased, followed by the high-pitched whining of the metal door's hinges as it closed. I'd recognized the voice as soon as I heard it. It was the security guard from last night, the one who I thought was going to catch me as I walked out. And slumping back again, the fear and terror now seemed silly. This whole game had got me paranoid. I just needed to focus on staying up here, staying hidden and safe. But for now, the danger had gone. After a couple of minutes, my eyelids gradually started drooping again, as my body demanded sleep and I slipped back into a blissful unconsciousness. And when I next awoke, it was to the sounds of my phone pinging a notification. I had no idea what time it was, but it was beginning to get dark again. Fumbling around for my phone and wiping the sleep from my eyes with my free hand, I chastised myself for forgetting to set it to silent. Even with no hunters around, if the security guard or any of the other employees had come up to the roof for a smoke, then they would certainly have heard that. My fingers collided with the cold metal of my phone and I scooped it up, turning it around and unlocking it, taking a couple of seconds to adjust the sudden brightness. And sure enough, there was a notification sitting there in the bar across the top. My heart sank as I looked at the message. Another email from a garbled mess of characters. I knew what it was even before I read the subject. Day 2 updates and ratings. Again, it was blank other than for a single URL. I knew what I would see if I clicked on it. I knew what would be happening, but I knew that I needed to watch it. Not for some kind of sick enjoyment like the rest of the viewers, but I needed to know how many other people were left in the game. The few hiders that remained, the more likely it was that I would get caught. Tapping the URL, the app that had been installed on my phone previously, the Devil's Games, forced itself to the front of the screen. It plunged into darkness as before, staying like that for several seconds before bursting into life and revealing a familiar sight. That dimly lit room filled with a small, embedded video player. The familiar empty stage sitting there in full view. I shuddered as I noticed the red stains across parts of the back wall. Flashes of last night's execution bursting through my mind. Sickness welled in my throat as I remembered the terrified screams of those people as they were viciously gunned down by the man in the bird mask. Then, movement from the screen dragged my attention back as the same song and dance as yesterday played out again. 4 people were led out onto the stage with their hands bound, while from the right appeared the familiar form of a man in the eagle mask. Well, folks, here we are again. What a day it's been. What a spectacle. I think we can all say that this year's games has been the best we've had so far. Anger welled up in me as he started speaking, the gleeful tone of his voice worming its way uncomfortably under my skin. The way he was acting, you would have thought he was commentating on some kind of prestigious sporting event, not something more akin to the Hunger Games. He was jovially walking across the stage as he spoke. Well, another day and another elimination round. I never get tired of these. He drew the same shining pistol in his hand again as he danced around. The faces of the people on the stage morphed into masks of absolute terror as he turned to face them, whimsically waving that gun in their faces. Bile wreathed in my stomach as I knew what was going to happen next. I sat there, staring at each of the poor people who had lost, trying to memorize their faces and tick them off my mental list. I was just focusing in on the last one, an older man in his late 50s, who looked as though he'd been badly beaten before he'd been dragged on stage. When shouting erupted and a flurry of movement filled the screen, there had been 2 hunters on the stage and 2 hiders. And while the masked man was busy threatening the hiders, one of the hunters had managed to slip his hand free from his own restraints and then made a run for it. He charged across the room, screaming at the top of his lungs, and 2 large men on the edge of the camera turned to face him and began to move. But the masked man didn't seem to notice, continuing his jovial ramblings. The hunter made it maybe 15 feet before he was tackled to the ground by one of the larger guards, landing with a sickening crunch. With the weight of the guard bearing down on him, all he could do was scream and yell obscenities at the masked man as he slowly danced his way towards him. Turning to face the camera, the masked man stood over the hunter, digging the heel of his well-polished shoe into the screaming man's neck, holding them in place. Well, folks, would you look at that? You have to admire that kind of spirit. It's what makes these games the great spectacle they are today. His head dropped slightly, almost as though he was saddened as he continued. If only you'd show that kind of enthusiasm earlier. And without missing a beat, he unloaded a round into the man's head, stopping his flailing instantly. The muzzle of his pistol flashed 3 more times as he turned on his heel and executed each of the remaining players without saying a word, cutting their terrified screams short. Everything was still for a second, as though he was composing himself before he turned to face the camera once again. I do apologize, my friends. I know this isn't the show that you all tuned in for. This isn't what we're about here at the Devil's Games. We pride ourselves on our professionalism. And so trust me when I say that this will not happen again. Spinning to face the stage, he raised his pistol once again, this time at the man who had led the players onto the stage initially, the one I assumed was responsible for binding the players. The man started blubbering something about it being a mistake and how he wouldn't let it happen again. I know you won't, replied the masked man, followed by the 5th and final muzzle flash as the blubbering man fell to the ground, and a steady crimson pool seeping from the hole in his head. Well, now that we've done some housekeeping, there's only one thing left to do. A big congratulations to all of you lucky players who've managed to survive yet another day. Until tomorrow, adieu. He took a deep bow as he finished, before the feed cut, and there was nothing but the black of my phone screen. Feeling well and truly disgusted, I locked my phone and I dropped it onto the sleeping bag. I wish I could tell you all that nothing more happened after that I just stayed on that roof for the rest of the game and that was it. But things got so much worse after that. So much worse. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.